The rain hammered against my windshield like bullets, each drop exploding in blurry starbursts that made the Manhattan streets look like an abstract painting of desperation. My hands trembled on the steering wheel of my ancient Honda Civic as I checked the rear-view mirror for the 100th time in 10 minutes. Derek's silver BMW was still there, weaving through traffic 3 cars behind me, his headlights cutting through the storm like predatory eyes. 23 years old, and I was running for my life from the man I'd once thought I loved. Come on, I whispered to my car, pressing harder on the accelerator as another red light approached. The engine wheezed in protest, a sound I'd grown accustomed to over the past year of scraping together every penny for my physical therapy certification while working double shifts at the rehabilitation clinic. Everything about my life had been held together with hope and determination until Derek Morrison decided I belonged to him. The light turned green, and I gunned it, my tires slipping slightly on the slick asphalt. Derek's car surged forward too, closing the gap between us. I could see his silhouette through his windshield, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his buddies to help corner me somewhere I couldn't escape. My ribs still ached from his last conversation with me 3 days ago, when I'd tried to break things off for the final time. He'd grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises, his fingers digging into my arms as he screamed about how nobody left Derek Morrison, how I was his property, how he'd make sure I understood that one way or another. I'd been hiding at my friend Sarah's apartment since then, but somehow he'd found me tonight, followed me as I tried to drive home, stalked me through the rain-soaked streets like I was prey, and he was something hungry and vicious. The speedometer crept toward 45 as I navigated the narrow streets of the financial district, where towering glass monuments to capitalism loomed on either side like glittering tombstones. At this hour, most of the buildings were dark except for scattered windows where someone was working late or security guards made their rounds. Derek's BMW gained another car length. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and without looking, I knew it was him. He'd been calling and texting for the past 20 minutes, each message more threatening than the last. The most recent one I'd glimpsed at a red light had been simple and terrifying. "You can't run forever, Elena." But I could try. I yanked the steering wheel left onto Madison Avenue, tires screaming in protest as I took the turn too fast. The Civic fishtailed slightly before regaining traction, and I heard Derek's engine roar behind me as he followed. Rain continued to pummel my car with increasing intensity, turning the world outside into a watercolor nightmare where everything bled together. That's when I saw the intersection ahead, where Madison crossed with East 47th. The traffic light was cycling through its colors, and I had maybe 30 seconds before it went red again. If I could make it through, and Derek got stuck behind the light, maybe I could lose him in the maze of side streets beyond. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Honda's engine protested with a sound like a dying animal, but the speedometer needle crept toward 50. The intersection grew larger in my windshield, and I could see the cross-traffic beginning to slow as their light shifted to yellow. Almost there. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It was stopped at the cross street, waiting for the light to change. A massive Escalade that looked like it belonged to someone important. Someone who could afford to drive a vehicle that cost more than I'd make in 2 years. Even through the rain and darkness, I could tell it was immaculate, with tinted windows so dark they reflected the streetlights like black mirrors. The traffic light ahead of me flickered from yellow to red. I should have stopped. Any rational person would have stopped. But Derek's headlights were right behind me, and Rational had abandoned me the moment I'd realized he was following me home. I had seconds to decide: stop and face whatever Derek had planned, or run the red light and hope the cross-traffic would give me enough of a head start to disappear. I chose to run. My Civic shot through the intersection just as the cross-traffic light turned green. I caught a glimpse of the Escalade beginning to move, its driver probably assuming the intersection was clear. Time slowed to honey-thick seconds. I saw my car's trajectory intersect with the SUV's path, saw my speedometer hovering near 50, saw the exact moment when my ancient Honda collided with what had to be the most expensive vehicle I'd ever been close to. The impact sent me forward against my seatbelt, my airbag exploding in my face with a chemical smell and the force of a punch. The world became a symphony of crushing metal, breaking glass, and the screaming protest of 2 engines that had suddenly stopped doing what engines were supposed to do. Then silence, broken only by the steady patter of rain on twisted metal and the hiss of escaping steam. I sat stunned for a moment, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my tongue, my ears ringing from the crash. My car had come to rest at an angle that blocked most of the intersection, its front end crumpled against the rear quarter panel of the Escalade. "Oh God," I whispered, the reality of what I'd just done crashing over me like ice water. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." I'd just rear-ended someone's very expensive SUV while running a red light, even if I had insurance, which was laughably inadequate. This was going to financially destroy me. And that was assuming the other driver didn't press charges for reckless driving. With shaking hands, I managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and push my driver's door open. Rain immediately soaked through my sweater as I stumbled out to assess the damage. My Civic's front end was completely destroyed, the hood buckled upward, and steam rising from what remained of the radiator. The Escalade had fared much better, with only some paint scratches and a dent in the rear panel that somehow managed to look expensive. That's when I heard the car doors opening. 3 doors to be precise. Not just the driver, but passenger doors as well. I looked up through the rain to see figures emerging from the SUV, and my blood turned to slush in my veins. The first man who stepped out was tall and lean, wearing a dark suit that somehow looked perfectly pressed despite the downpour. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence, and even in the dim street lighting, I could see the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. The second man was broader, built like a linebacker, with hands that looked capable of crushing bones, and a face that suggested he'd done exactly that on multiple occasions. He positioned himself near the rear of the SUV, eyes scanning the intersection with professional alertness. But it was the third man who made my breath catch in my throat. He emerged from the driver's side with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Tall and powerfully built, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that managed to look perfectly styled even in the rain. His suit was obviously expensive, tailored to showcase broad shoulders and a lean waist, and he wore it with the casual elegance of a man born to wealth and power. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Dark brown, almost black in the street lighting, they fixed on me with an intensity that made every instinct I possessed scream danger. This wasn't just someone wealthy enough to afford a luxury SUV. This was someone accustomed to having problems solved quickly and quietly, by whatever means necessary. He walked toward me with measured steps, rain beating on his suit without seeming to touch him. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent I couldn't quite place, something European, maybe Italian, and authority that made it clear he was accustomed to being obeyed. "You just caused $50,000 in damage to my vehicle," he said, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. I swallowed hard, tasting blood and rain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean..." "Now you owe me your life." The words hit me like another collision, final and absolute. Behind him, his 2 companions had taken positions that blocked any escape routes, though I doubted my legs would have carried me far anyway. That's when Derek's BMW screeched to a halt behind my wrecked Civic. The sleek black SUV that carried me through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan felt more like a hearse than a rescue vehicle. I sat rigid in the back seat, hyper-aware of the 2 silent men flanking me, their expensive suits and concealed weapons making it clear this wasn't a charity ride. The man who had stepped out of the Escalade, the one whose penetrating brown eyes still haunted my thoughts, sat across from me with the casual confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Dante Moretti. That's what the lean man with the shoulder holster had called him, when they'd bundled me into this vehicle after Derek's mysterious disappearance into the night. Just Dante, spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty or religious figures. "Where are you taking me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine and the steady drumming of rain against bulletproof glass. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied, his accented voice carrying undertones I couldn't quite identify. Italian, definitely, but refined by years of American education and business dealings. "Your friend Derek won't be bothering you anymore." The way he said it sent ice through my veins. Derek's silver BMW had simply vanished from the intersection, along with its driver, as if neither had ever existed. When I'd asked what happened to him, Dante had merely smiled, an expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. "What did you do to him?" "I convinced him to pursue other interests," Dante said, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white shirt. Even after standing in the rain and dealing with a car accident, he looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine. Derek Morrison has been operating under the mistaken impression that he could conduct business in my territory without consequences. Tonight provided an excellent opportunity to correct that misunderstanding. I stared at him, trying to process the casual way he discussed what sounded suspiciously like a threat. Or worse. Your territory? Manhattan below 59th Street. The docks in Brooklyn. Several establishments in Queens. Dante's dark eyes met mine with unnerving intensity. You've been living and working in areas under my family's protection for over a year, Elena Harper. My blood turned to slush. He knew my name. My full name. How do you... 23 years old. Graduated from NYU with a degree in physical therapy last spring. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Currently working at Riverside Rehabilitation Center on East 34th Street while completing your certification requirements. Lives alone in a studio apartment on 47th Street. Pays rent 3 days late every month, but always pays in full. Each detail hit me like a separate blow. You've been watching me? I've been watching Derek Morrison, Dante corrected, pulling out a tablet from a compartment I hadn't noticed. Derek Morrison, who owes money to people connected to my organization. Derek Morrison, who has been using you as collateral for debts he can't pay. The words didn't make sense at first, bouncing around in my brain like pinballs. Collateral? 3 weeks ago, Derek borrowed $50,000 from an associate of mine to cover gambling debts he owed to other, less patient creditors. Dante swiped across the tablet screen, revealing what appeared to be financial records. When he defaulted on the payment schedule, he offered alternative compensation. You. I felt like I was falling through space, the world tilting sideways around me. That's impossible. We broke up. I told him I never wanted to see him again. Yes, I'm aware of your attempts to end the relationship. Dante's voice carried a note of something that might have been sympathy. Derek had no intention of honoring your wishes. He planned to deliver you to my associate tonight, claiming you had agreed to work off his debt through specialized services. The implications crashed over me like ice water. Derek hadn't been chasing me out of jealousy or possessive anger. He'd been hunting me like cargo, planning to hand me over to criminals who would use me to pay his debts. I had no idea, I whispered, my hands shaking in my lap. I believe you. Dante reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Elena Harper, daughter of Michael and Sarah Harper, both deceased. No siblings, no close family. Worked her way through college while caring for her grandmother until the woman's death 2 years ago. Clean record, no criminal associations, no debts beyond standard student loans. He knew everything about me, more than Derek had ever bothered to learn during our 6-month relationship. The SUV turned onto a tree-lined avenue in what I recognized as Long Island's most exclusive area. Mansion after mansion rolled past the windows, each one representing more wealth than I'd see in a lifetime of physical therapy work. Where are we going? I asked again. My home. Dante closed the folder with a decisive snap. Derek Morrison's arrangement with my associate has been terminated. But that leaves us with a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that gets you killed if we handle it incorrectly. The SUV slowed as we approached a set of imposing iron gates set into a stone wall that seemed to stretch for blocks. Victor Kozlov doesn't believe in coincidences, Elena. When he discovers that Derek's collateral happened to crash into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared, he's going to assume you're working for me. Victor Kozlov. The name meant nothing to me, but Dante pronounced it like a curse word. Who is Victor Kozlov? The head of the Russian organization that's been trying to expand into my territory for the past 2 years. The gate swung open silently, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured gardens toward a mansion that belonged in architectural magazines. He's also the man Derek owed money to before he came to my associate for help. I watched the enormous house grow larger as we approached, my brain struggling to keep up with the layers of criminal politics I'd apparently stumbled into. So Derek owed money to this Kozlov person, borrowed from your people to pay him back, and was planning to give me to your associate when he couldn't repay the loan. Precisely. Dante seemed pleased that I was following the logic. Victor Kozlov is not known for his forgiving nature. When he discovers that Derek has vanished and you've survived, he's going to want answers, and Victor's interrogation methods are considerably less gentle than mine. The SUV came to a stop in front of the mansion's main entrance, where more men in dark suits waited. Through the rain, I could see the outline of security cameras, motion sensors, and what looked suspiciously like armed guards positioned strategically around the property. "This is kidnapping," I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "This is protection," Dante replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You're not safe out there anymore, Elena. Derek made sure of that when he put your name on documents as his collateral." The door beside me opened, revealing the lean man with the shoulder holster. Marco, Dante had called him during the brief, tense conversation they'd had while transferring me from my wrecked Honda to this SUV. "Welcome to the Moretti estate, Miss Harper," Marco said, his voice professionally courteous but carrying an undertone that suggested disagreement wasn't an option. I looked back at Dante, who was already stepping out of the vehicle with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to having his every need anticipated. "How long?" "That depends on several factors," he replied, straightening his suit jacket. "How quickly we can locate Derek Morrison's current whereabouts. How much information Victor Kozlov already has about tonight's events. How effectively we can convince him that you pose no threat to his operations. And if you can't convince him," Dante's smile returned, cold and sharp as winter steel, "then we'll have to explore other options." As I followed him up the stone steps toward the mansion's entrance, rainwater running from my hair and my clothes still damp from the accident, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked exactly like what I was, a 23-year-old physical therapy student who had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. But Dante Moretti looked like he was coming home. The foyer that greeted us was larger than my entire apartment, with marble floors that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier and artwork that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. Everything spoke of old money, established power, and the kind of security that came from being untouchable. "Your rooms are on the second floor," Dante said, handing his wetsuit jacket to a woman who appeared from nowhere to take it. "Marco will show you up and explain the house rules. We'll discuss your situation in more detail tomorrow, after you've had time to process tonight's events." "House rules? Nothing unreasonable," Marco assured me, gesturing toward a sweeping staircase. "Mostly for your own protection. The grounds are secure, but we ask that guests don't wander unescorted after dark. The staff is discreet and trustworthy, but we prefer that certain topics not be discussed with them." I followed him up the stairs, hyper-aware of how out of place I looked in this palace of marble and mahogany. My sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished steps, and I was certain I was leaving damp footprints on priceless carpets. "Miss Harper," Dante's voice stopped me at the top of the stairs. I turned to find him looking up at me with those intense brown eyes, his expression unreadable. "You're not a prisoner here. You're a guest under my protection, but understand that protection comes with certain obligations." "What kind of obligations?" "Complete honesty about your relationship with Derek Morrison, full cooperation with our security measures, and absolute discretion about what you see and hear while you're here." His voice carried the weight of law, as if these weren't requests, but commandments. "Can I count on your compliance?" I thought about Derek's plan to sell me to criminals, about Victor Kozlov and his reportedly harsh interrogation methods, about the wreckage of my Honda Civic sitting in that intersection, along with my old life. "Yes," I said quietly. "You can count on it." "Excellent." Dante's smile this time held a trace of genuine warmth. "Welcome to your new life, Elena Harper." 3 days at the Moretti mansion had taught me that luxury could feel surprisingly like a velvet-lined prison. I woke each morning in a bedroom larger than most people's entire apartments, surrounded by furnishings that belonged in museums, served meals by silent staff who treated me with polite deference while never quite meeting my eyes. "This is ridiculous," I said to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, which was framed in what appeared to be genuine gold leaf. My red hair looked strange against the backdrop of imported Italian marble and fixtures that probably cost more than my yearly salary. I'm not his possession, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Designer clothes had appeared in the walk-in closet, all in my exact size, all in styles I would have chosen if I'd had unlimited money. The bathroom was stocked with luxury cosmetics and skincare products from brands I'd only seen in magazines, Even my meals were perfectly calibrated to my preferences, as if someone had studied my dietary habits with scientific precision, which I was beginning to suspect they had. The soft knock at my suite door interrupted my brooding. Marco's voice followed immediately after. "Miss Harper, Mr. Moretti requests your presence in the dining room." I'd quickly learned that requests from Dante Moretti weren't actually requests at all. "I'll be down in a minute," I called back, smoothing the wrinkles from the silk blouse I'd reluctantly chosen from the mysteriously well-stocked closet. Everything fit perfectly, of course. Even the undergarments were my exact size. A level of attention to detail that should have been flattering, but instead felt invasive. The dining room could have hosted a small wedding, with its crystal chandelier and table that stretched for at least 20 feet. But only 2 places were set this morning. At one end, where morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the meticulously maintained gardens, Dante sat reading what appeared to be financial reports, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, before I'd destroyed it in the accident that had brought us together. When he looked up at my approach, those intense brown eyes assessed me with the same thoroughness he might apply to a business acquisition. "Good morning, Elena. I trust you slept well as anyone can when they're being held against their will," I replied, taking the seat across from him. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of pretending this arrangement was anything other than what it was. "Against your will." Dante set down his papers with deliberate care, giving me his full attention. "You're free to leave whenever you choose. The front door isn't locked. And walk straight into Viktor Kozlov's arms? You've made it very clear that's not actually an option. Viktor Kozlov is the reality of your situation, not something I created." Dante poured coffee from an antique silver service into a cup that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Though I understand your frustration. This isn't the life you planned for yourself." I accepted the coffee, inhaling the rich aroma that spoke of exotic beans and professional preparation. Even imprisoned, I was being treated better than I'd ever treated myself. What is this exactly? This arrangement? Am I a guest, a prisoner, or something else entirely? "You're under my protection," Dante replied, the same phrase he'd used 3 days ago, "which means you're my responsibility until we resolve the threat against you. I never asked for your protection." "No, but you needed it." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the polished mahogany table. "Derek Morrison's body was found yesterday morning in the Hudson River. 3 bullet wounds, signs of torture before death. Viktor Kozlov's signature work." My hand froze halfway to the envelope, coffee cup suspended in mid-air. Derek was dead. Actually dead. Not just disappeared. The man who'd terrorized me, who'd planned to sell me like property, was now fish food in New York's most polluted waterway. "How do you—" "Because I have sources throughout the city's criminal networks," Dante interrupted gently. "Derek Morrison attempted to negotiate directly with Viktor Kozlov yesterday morning. He offered to provide information about my operations in exchange for forgiveness of his debts." I forced myself to pick up the envelope, though my hands shook slightly. Inside were photographs, crime scene shots that made my stomach lurch. Derek's body, bloated and pale, pulled from the water. Police reports, medical examiner findings. Viktor didn't believe Derek had access to useful intelligence, Dante continued, his voice matter-of-fact despite the graphic evidence spread between us. But he was very interested to learn about the woman Derek had offered as collateral. The woman who'd crashed into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared. "He thinks I'm working for you. He thinks you're either working for me, or you possess information that could be valuable to him. Either way, he wants very much to have a conversation with you." Dante's smile held no warmth. Viktor Kozlov's conversations tend to be brief but extremely unpleasant. I stared at the crime scene photographs, trying to reconcile the violent corpse with the man who'd once brought me flowers and promised to change his controlling behavior. Derek had been terrible, abusive, possessive. But seeing him reduced to bloated meat in morgue photos made me feel sick. "I need some air," I said, pushing back from the table. "Of course. The gardens are lovely this time of day." Dante gestured toward the French doors that led to the terrace. "Marco will accompany you, naturally." Naturally. I stood, leaving the photographs scattered on the table, like evidence of everything wrong with the world I'd stumbled into. Because I'm under your protection. Elena. Dante's voice stopped me at the door. When I turned, his expression held something that might have been genuine concern. I know this isn't the life you wanted, but it's the life that will keep you breathing. The gardens were even more impressive in daylight, with carefully planned landscapes that created intimate spaces within the larger grounds. Marco followed at a discreet distance as I walked gravel paths between flower beds that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Everything was perfect, controlled, beautiful, and completely artificial. I found myself at a small pond where ornamental fish swam in lazy circles, trapped in their perfect environment just as I was trapped in mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Enjoying the view? Dante's voice came from behind me, closer than I'd expected. I turned to find him approaching alone, having apparently dismissed Marco. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolling up his shirt sleeves in a gesture that should have made him look more casual, but somehow only emphasized the power in his forearms and the expensive watch that caught the morning sunlight. It's very controlled, I said. Everything in its proper place, serving its intended purpose. You think that's what this is? Control for its own sake? Isn't it? I faced him directly, tired of the careful politeness that had defined our interactions. You've researched every detail of my life, dressed me like a doll, fed me like a pet, and surrounded me with enough luxury to make me grateful for my captivity. It's very sophisticated, but it's still control. Something flickered in Dante's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Most people in your situation would be either terrified into compliance or trying to seduce me for advantage. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the faint scar along his jawline. You're doing neither. Maybe I'm just not most people. No, he agreed softly. You're definitely not. The moment stretched between us, charged with an attraction I didn't want to acknowledge. Dante Moretti was everything I should fear. Powerful, dangerous, controlling. But standing here in his perfect garden, I couldn't ignore the way my pulse quickened when he looked at me like I was something rare and valuable. Tell me something, I said, breaking the tension before I did something stupid. The night you found me, when I crashed into your car, you were leaving a meeting, weren't you? Something to do with Viktor Kozlov. Dante's expression shuddered slightly. Yes. What kind of meeting requires bulletproof vehicles and armed escorts? The kind where people discuss territory, business arrangements, and occasionally who lives or dies. His honesty was brutal and refreshing after 3 days of careful euphemisms. I was attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution to Viktor's expansion into my areas of influence. And how did that go? Poorly. Viktor Kozlov isn't interested in peaceful resolutions. Dante turned away from me, looking out over his controlled paradise. He believes that power should be taken, not negotiated for. Is that what this is about? Power? It's about protecting what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice made me shiver despite the warm morning air. My family, my people, my territory. Viktor Kozlov wants to tear down everything my father and grandfather built, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Your father and grandfather? The Moretti family has controlled certain aspects of New York's economy for 3 generations, Dante said, as casually as he might discuss the weather. Shipping, construction, waste management, import-export, legitimate businesses with unofficial aspects. And Viktor wants to take that away from you. Viktor wants me dead, and my organization absorbed into his. Dante turned back to face me, his expression deadly serious. The night you crashed into my car, I was returning from our final attempt at negotiation. He'd made it clear that war was inevitable. The weight of that statement settled over me like a lead blanket. I wasn't just caught between 2 men. I was caught between 2 armies preparing for battle. Where does that leave me? Safer here than anywhere else in the city, Dante replied, until we can eliminate the threat Viktor poses. Eliminate the threat, I repeated. You mean kill him? I mean protect what matters to me. Dante's eyes met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. And you matter to me, Elena. More than you should, considering how we met. The admission hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Dante Moretti was offering me something. Protection. Luxury. possibly even affection. But the price was my freedom, my old life, any chance of being anything other than a kept woman in a criminal's paradise. I need to think, I said finally. Of course. Dante stepped back, giving me space but not breaking eye contact. Take all the time you need. But remember, out there, you're Elena Harper, physical therapy student with no protection and no resources. Here, you're under the protection of the Moretti family. That means something in this city. As he walked away, leaving me alone with the ornamental fish and my complicated thoughts, I realized he was right about one thing. I wasn't most people. Most people would have chosen safety over uncertainty, luxury over freedom. But I was beginning to understand that most people had never felt the dangerous pull of Dante Moretti's attention, or the terrifying possibility that being his might be exactly what I'd been searching for without knowing it. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., announced by the sound of breaking glass and the sharp crack of automatic weapons fire echoing through the mansion's marble corridors. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as adrenaline flooded my system. The security lights outside my window had activated, bathing the grounds in harsh white light that revealed dark figures moving with military precision between the carefully manicured hedges. This wasn't a robbery. This was war. My bedroom door burst open before I could fully process what was happening. Marco appeared in tactical gear, his face grim as he swept the room with practiced efficiency. Miss Harper, we need to move. Now. What's happening? Kozlov's people found us. Marco was already at the closet, pulling out clothes and throwing them at me. Get dressed. We have maybe 3 minutes before they breach the main house. I scrambled into jeans and a sweater, my fingers shaking as gunfire continued to erupt from multiple directions. Through the windows, I could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. The perfectly ordered world of the Moretti estate had transformed into a battlefield. Where's Dante? Coordinating the defense. Marco checked his weapon with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. He wanted you moved to the panic room immediately. The panic room turned out to be a reinforced bunker hidden behind a bookshelf in Dante's study, equipped with communication equipment, medical supplies, and enough food and water to survive a siege. Banks of monitors showed every angle of the estate, revealing the scope of the assault. At least 20 armed figures had breached the perimeter, moving with the coordination of professional soldiers. How did they find us? I asked, watching the screens in horrified fascination as Dante's security forces engaged the attackers in running battles across the grounds. Someone talked, Marco replied grimly, speaking rapidly into his headset in Italian before switching to English. Or they followed a signal. Kozlov has resources we underestimated. On one monitor, I saw Dante himself leading a team of his men through the gardens, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd been trained in combat. He wore tactical gear like he was born to it, directing his forces with hand signals while laying down covering fire with an assault rifle. Watching him transformed from sophisticated businessman into lethal warrior was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He's good at this, I found myself saying. Best I've ever seen. Marco agreed, monitoring multiple radio frequencies. Dante didn't just inherit his position. He earned it in situations exactly like this. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness broken only by the glow of the security monitors. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the brief blackout felt like an omen. They're trying to cut power to the main systems, Marco explained, his fingers flying over the communication console. If they take out the generators, we lose surveillance and defensive coordination. On screen, I watched Dante's team fighting their way toward the backup power facility. But Kozlov's people had anticipated this move. The basement corridors swarmed with armed figures, turning the mansion's lower levels into a maze of deadly hide-and-seek. Marco, I said quietly, unable to tear my eyes from the screens. The night Derek died, you said Kozlov tortured him for information. What if Derek told him more than you realized? Marco's expression darkened as he considered this possibility. What do you mean? Derek knew I worked at the rehabilitation center. He knew my schedule, my routines, probably even my emergency contacts. I watched Dante disappear from one monitor only to reappear on another, still fighting his way through the mansion's defenses. What if he told Kozlov about my work? About the techniques I know? What kind of techniques? Physical therapy isn't just about helping people recover. I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. It's about understanding how bodies work, how they break, how to manipulate pain and healing. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be very useful for interrogation. Marco went very still. You think Kozlov wants you alive for more than just information about Dante's operations? I think Derek sold me twice, I realized with growing horror. Once as collateral for his debts, and again as a potential asset when Kozlov captured him. The implications were staggering. Viktor Kozlov wasn't just trying to eliminate a witness or capture a pawn in his war with Dante. He wanted someone with medical knowledge who could be useful for his own operations. Someone who understood human anatomy well enough to inflict precise damage or extract information efficiently. A new wave of explosions shook the mansion, closer this time. On the monitors, I could see that several of Kozlov's men had reached the main floor, moving systematically through rooms while Dante's forces fell back toward more defensible positions. "Miss Harper," Marco said, his voice urgent as he received updates through his earpiece. "We may need to evacuate to the secondary facility. What about Dante? He's ordered the fallback protocol. If we can't hold the main house, everyone retreats to the warehouse district where we have better tactical advantages." I watched the screens as the battle raged through the mansion I'd called home for the past week. The library where Dante and I had shared coffee. The gardens where we'd walked and talked. The dining room where he'd shown me photographs of Derek's corpse. All of it was being torn apart by men with automatic weapons and military training. "There," I said, pointing to one monitor that showed Dante pinned down behind an overturned couch in what looked like the main foyer. "He's trapped. 3 of Kozlov's men had him in a crossfire, using the cover of the marble pillars to advance on his position. I could see the calculation in their movements. They weren't trying to kill him quickly. They wanted to capture him alive, probably for the same reasons they wanted me. Marco, we have to help him. Miss Harper, my orders are to keep you safe. Dante would rather die than have you put in danger trying to save him. But what if there's another way?" I studied the monitors, my physical therapy training kicking in as I analyzed the tactical situation like a complex rehabilitation case. I know this house better than Kozlov's people do, and I know things about combat injuries that could be useful. What are you thinking? "The service corridors," I said, tracing routes on the monitor screens. "The ones the staff use to move around without disturbing guests. They connect to every major room, including the foyer where Dante's pinned down." Marco shook his head. "Too dangerous. More dangerous than letting Viktor Kozlov capture the head of the Moretti family?" I met his eyes directly. "You said Dante earned his position. Let me earn mine." For a long moment, Marco wrestled with conflicting loyalties, his duty to protect me against his need to save his boss. Finally, he reached for a weapons case I hadn't noticed before. "If we're doing this," he said grimly, "you follow my lead exactly. No heroics, no improvisation. Understood?" "Understood." As Marco armed me with a compact pistol and explained the basics of point-and-shoot combat, I realized I was crossing a line I could never uncross. Elena Harper, physical therapy student, would never have considered charging into a gunfight to save a man she barely knew. But Elena Harper was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, more willing to fight for what mattered to her. And Dante Moretti, dangerous, powerful, protective Dante, had somehow become what mattered most. The service corridors were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red shadows. Marco moved ahead of me with practiced stealth, communicating through hand signals as we navigated the maze of passages that honeycombed the mansion. We could hear the gunfire above us, muffled by marble and hardwood, but still close enough to make my pulse race. Twice we had to freeze as footsteps passed overhead, Kozlov's men searching rooms and calling to each other in what sounded like Russian. "There," Marco whispered as we reached a junction that connected to the main foyer. Through a service grate, we could see Dante's position. He was bleeding from a wound on his left arm, using his good hand to return fire while calculating options that were rapidly running out. "When I give the signal," Marco breathed in my ear, "you provide covering fire toward the pillars on the right. Don't try to hit anything. Just make noise and keep their heads down. I'll circle around and take them from behind." I nodded, gripping the pistol with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. The weight of the weapon felt foreign, but not uncomfortable. Like a tool I'd always been meant to hold. Now? Marco whispered. I kicked out the service grate and opened fire toward the marble pillars, the pistol bucking in my hands as I squeezed the trigger repeatedly. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and I could see chips of marble flying as my shots went wide of their targets. But it worked. Kozlov's men dove for cover, their attention divided between Dante's position and this new threat from an unexpected angle. In that moment of confusion, Marco appeared behind them like a ghost, his weapons speaking with deadly precision. When the shooting stopped, 3 bodies lay motionless on the marble floor, and Dante was staring at me with an expression of amazement and something that might have been pride. "Elena," he said, rising from his position behind the couch. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life," I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Dante crossed the foyer in quick strides, pulling me against his chest with his good arm while Marco secured the area. I could feel his heart racing against mine, smell the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne, feel the warmth of his breath against my hair. "You could have been killed," he said roughly. "So could you, Elena." The way he said my name carried weight, promise, claim. When he pulled back to look at me, his brown eyes held an intensity that made everything else, the gunfire, the danger, the bodies on the floor, fade into background noise. "You're in danger because of me," he said softly. "I know. This isn't going to get easier. Kozlov won't stop until one of us is dead." I thought about Derek's corpse in the Hudson River, about the men who'd just tried to capture us both, about the choice I was making by standing here in Dante's arms instead of demanding to be taken somewhere safe. "Then don't leave me out of it," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "If I'm going to be in danger anyway, let me be in it with you." Something shifted in Dante's expression, a decision made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then his mouth was on mine, claiming me with a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and desperation, and promises neither of us was ready to speak aloud. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, the mansion had fallen silent around us. The battle for the Moretti estate was over, but the war with Viktor Kozlov had only just begun, and I was no longer just collateral damage in that war. I was a willing participant, armed and dangerous and completely, irrevocably committed to the man who held me like I was worth fighting the entire world to protect. The discovery came 3 days after the attack, hidden in Marco's personal effects like a bomb waiting to detonate what remained of my trust. I'd been looking for first aid supplies in his room. He'd been unconscious since taking a bullet during the siege, when I found the encrypted phone tucked inside a hollowed-out book on his nightstand. The messages were in Russian, but the contact name was clear enough. V. Kozlov. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of communications, each exchange selling pieces of our lives to the enemy. Meeting schedules, security protocols, my daily routines, even photographs of me walking through the mansion's gardens, taken from angles that could only have been shot by someone with intimate access to the property. Marco, Dante's most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd stood beside me during the firefight, who'd trained me to use a weapon, who'd risked his life protecting what we both claimed to love. He'd been betraying us from the beginning. "Elena?" Dante's voice from the doorway made me jump, nearly dropping the phone. He stood in the entrance to Marco's room, his left arm still in a sling from the gunshot wound he'd sustained during the attack. The past 3 days had aged him, etching new lines around his eyes and a hardness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Dante stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with his good hand. "What did you find?" I held up the phone, watching his expression shift from curiosity to dangerous stillness as he processed what I was showing him. "Marco's been feeding information to Kozlov for months, maybe longer." Dante crossed the room in 2 strides, taking the phone from my hands with surgical precision. His eyes scanned the messages, his face becoming a mask of cold fury as he read betrayals documented in black and white. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly, but the words carried the weight of earthquake. "There's more," I said, dreading what came next, but knowing he had to hear it. "Dante, the night I crashed into your car, Marco knew I was going to be there. What are you talking about? I pointed to a message thread dated a week before the accident. Look at the timestamps. Marco told Kozlov about Derek's debt, about his plan to use me as collateral. But there's something else. A message about rerouting your return from the meeting with Kozlov that night. Marco made sure you'd be on Madison Avenue at exactly the right time. Dante went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. You're saying the accident wasn't random. I'm saying Marco orchestrated everything. Derek chasing me running that red light, even the exact intersection where we collided. The words tasted bitter as I spoke them. He wanted you to find me, Dante. He wanted you to bring me here. Why would he? Dante stopped, the implications crashing over him like ice water. Because Kozlov knew about your medical background, your knowledge of anatomy, pain management, interrogation techniques, and because he knew you'd protect me, I added quietly. Marco's been playing a long game, using me as bait to make you vulnerable. Dante set the phone down with careful control, but I could see the rage building in his dark eyes like storm clouds gathering. 20 feet away, Marco lay unconscious in the mansion's medical facility, hooked to machines that kept him alive, while his body fought off infection from the gunshot wound that might have been meant to maintain his cover. How long have you known? Dante asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I found the phone an hour ago. I've been trying to work out how deep the betrayal goes. I pulled out printed copies I'd made of the most damaging messages. It goes back at least 8 months, maybe longer. He's given Kozlov everything. Security protocols, financial information, personnel files, even details about your childhood, your family. Dante's jaw tightened as he scanned the evidence. My parents, my sister, the anniversary of their deaths, the location where they're buried, even the specific way they were killed. I watched his hands clench into fists. Kozlov has been preparing for psychological warfare, not just physical. And you? Dante's eyes met mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. What did Marco tell him about you? I hesitated, then handed him another set of messages. Everything. My background. My training. My feelings for you. He's been documenting my integration into your life like a case study. Dante read in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Marco had cataloged every conversation, every moment of growing intimacy, every sign that Elena Harper was becoming more than just a protected asset to the head of the Moretti family. He turned our relationship into intelligence, Dante said finally. Worse than that, I replied, showing him the final set of messages. Look at the dates on these last exchanges. Marco was planning to deliver me to Kozlov during the next arranged meeting. When? Tomorrow night. There's a warehouse in Brooklyn where you're supposed to meet with Kozlov's representatives to discuss territorial agreements. Marco was going to drug me and present me as a peace offering. Dante went silent for a long moment, processing betrayals that cut deeper than bullets. His most trusted ally had been systematically dismantling everything he'd built, using the woman he cared about as the ultimate weapon against him. I should have seen it, he said finally. Marco's been with me for 5 years. He saved my life twice, built half our security protocols, trained our people. That's what made him so valuable to Kozlov, I pointed out, and so dangerous to us. Dante looked toward the medical facility where Marco still fought for his life, machines beeping steadily in the distance. Part of me wants to walk in there and put a bullet in his head while he sleeps. But you won't. No, Dante agreed. Because I need him alive long enough to find out what other surprises he's planted in our organization. And because... He paused, searching for words. Because you've taught me that not every problem should be solved with violence. The admission surprised us both. 3 weeks ago, Dante Moretti would have executed a traitor without hesitation. Now, he was considering alternatives, looking for solutions that didn't involve more blood on his hands. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking Marco gave us an opportunity along with his betrayal. Dante's expression shifted from fury to calculation, the strategic mind that had built an empire reasserting itself. Kozlov expects to receive you tomorrow night. What if we give him what he wants, but not the way he expects? You want to use me as bait. I want to use Marco's betrayal against Kozlov, Dante corrected. But only if you're willing. This would be dangerous, Elena. More dangerous than anything we've done so far. I thought about the encrypted phone, about months of documented intimacies sold to our enemy, about the man unconscious in the medical facility who'd smiled at me while planning my abduction. The woman who'd crashed into Dante's car 3 weeks ago would have been horrified by what I was considering. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, and absolutely furious at being betrayed by someone I'd begun to trust. What do you need me to do? Dante's smile was sharp as winter steel. Help me turn Marco's trap into Kozlov's funeral. As we began planning our counterattack, I realized I'd crossed another line in my transformation from innocent bystander to active participant in Dante's war. Marco's betrayal hadn't just exposed our vulnerabilities. It had stripped away the last of my illusions about the life I'd chosen. I wasn't just under Dante Moretti's protection anymore. I was his partner in everything, including revenge against the people who'd tried to use our love as a weapon against us both. Tomorrow night, Viktor Kozlov would learn that some traps work both ways, and that the woman he'd tried so hard to capture was far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The warehouse in Brooklyn stood like a monument to forgotten industry, its broken windows reflecting the harbor lights in jagged fragments. I sat in the passenger seat of Dante's Maserati, watching the rain streak down the windshield while my heart hammered against my ribs. In 12 hours, this place would host a meeting that would either end the war with Viktor Kozlov or get us both killed. You don't have to do this, Dante said for the 5th time since we'd left the mansion. His hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, and I could see the conflict warring in his brown eyes. We can find another way. There is no other way, I replied, adjusting the concealed microphone taped against my collarbone. Marco's betrayal gave us one chance to turn this around. If we don't take it, Kozlov will keep coming until one of us is dead. Dante parked in the shadow of a shipping container, away from the security cameras that would record tomorrow's meeting. Through the rain, I could see other vehicles positioned around the warehouse. Dante's men taking positions for what we all hoped would be Viktor Kozlov's final mistake. The moment you signal distress, we abort, Dante said, turning to face me in the dim interior. I don't care if Kozlov has a gun to your head or promises to end the war. You signal, and I come in shooting. And if everything goes according to plan, then tomorrow night, Viktor Kozlov learns that the Moretti family doesn't negotiate with people who threaten what's ours. Dante's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd built an empire on the foundation of keeping his word. But Elena, if something goes wrong, I silenced him by pressing my lips to his, tasting rain and determination, and the fear he was trying so hard to hide. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I could see my own resolve reflected in his eyes. Nothing's going wrong, I said. Marco gave us everything we need to know about Kozlov's operation, his security protocols, his personnel, even his psychological profile. We're not walking into a trap. We're building one. Dante nodded, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the steering wheel in patterns that spoke of nervous energy barely contained. Tell me again what happens if he suspects you're working with me. He won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. According to Marco's files, Kozlov expects his prisoners to show fear, defiance, or attempts at seduction. I'm going to give him something else entirely, which is useful information he can verify, delivered by someone too terrified to lie. I adjusted the hidden recording device one more time. Kozlov thinks he's getting a frightened physical therapy student who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. By the time he realizes what I actually am, it'll be too late. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marco's encrypted phone contained detailed intelligence about Kozlov's operation. Locations, personnel, financial structures, everything we needed to cripple his organization. But that intelligence was useless unless we could get close enough to verify it and identify targets for elimination. My role was to play the terrified victim while secretly documenting everything I saw and heard. The recording equipment would capture conversations, locations, and personnel details that Dante's forces could use to coordinate simultaneous strikes against Kozlov's entire network. And your brother? Dante asked quietly. The question hit like ice water. 3 hours ago, we'd received confirmation that James Harper, the brother I'd mourned for 5 years, was not only alive, but serving as one of Kozlov's most trusted lieutenants. The revelation had nearly broken something fundamental inside me, but it also provided the final piece of our plan. "James is the reason this will work," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "Kozlov will want to use our reunion as psychological leverage. He'll bring James to the meeting to demonstrate his power over me. And when you see him, I'll do what needs to be done." I met Dante's gaze directly. James made his choice when he faked his death and joined Kozlov. Now I'm making mine. The truth was more complicated than I wanted to admit. Part of me still remembered the brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd protected me from bullies, who'd promised to always be there when our parents died. But that James Harper had died in the car accident 5 years ago. The man working for Viktor Kozlov was someone else entirely. Someone who'd used my grief as cover for his new criminal career. "I need you to promise me something," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow night, you'll remember that you chose this life. You chose us." His hand found mine in the darkness of the car, fingers intertwining with desperate intensity. "Because after tomorrow, there's no going back, Elena. You'll be as deep in this world as I am." I thought about the woman who'd crashed into his car 3 weeks ago. Elena Harper, physical therapy student, living paycheck to paycheck and dreaming of a quiet, normal life. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone I'd once known but could barely remember. "I'm already there," I said quietly. "The moment I chose to fight beside you instead of hiding behind you, I crossed that line. Tomorrow night isn't about becoming something new. It's about finishing what we started." Dante brought our joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "What we started," he repeated. "I like the sound of that. Even though it means I'll know all your secrets, every detail of how the Moretti family operates, especially because of that." Dante's smile held warmth and possessiveness in equal measure. A queen needs to understand the kingdom she's going to rule. The word hung between us like a promise and a question. Queen. Not just a protected asset or a cherished lover, but an equal partner in everything Dante had built, and everything we would build together. "Is that what I am?" I asked. "Your queen? You're whatever you want to be," Dante replied. "But if you're asking what I want you to be," he paused, searching for words. "I want you to be the person who stands beside me when the world tries to tear us apart. I want you to be the voice that reminds me there's more to power than fear. I want you to be the reason I build something worth protecting instead of just something worth fighting for." I stared at him in the dim light. This dangerous man who'd somehow become the center of my world. 3 weeks ago, the idea of ruling a criminal empire would have horrified me. Now, the possibility felt like destiny finally revealing itself. "Ask me again after tomorrow night," I said finally, "when we've eliminated Kozlov and secured our future. Ask me then if I want to be your queen." Dante's laugh was soft and full of dark promise. "Oh, I will. And when I do, I already know what your answer will be." As we drove back toward the mansion through the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn, I realized he was right. The woman who'd fled from Derek Morrison's abuse had evolved into someone who would walk willingly into Viktor Kozlov's trap. The frightened crash victim had become a predator capable of using her own brother as bait. Tomorrow night would test everything we'd built together. Our trust, our strategy, our love, and our willingness to do whatever it took to protect what mattered most. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was for people who had something to lose. Elena Harper had lost everything the night she crashed into Dante Moretti's SUV. What emerged from that wreckage was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to building an empire worth ruling alongside the man who'd shown her what it meant to choose power over safety. Tomorrow, Viktor Kozlov would learn the difference between a victim and a queen. By the time he understood his mistake, it would be far too late to correct it. The Brooklyn warehouse felt like a cathedral of shadows when I walked through its rusted doors, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness above. Viktor Kozlov sat at a metal table in the center of the space, flanked by 6 armed men whose faces belonged on wanted posters. Even seated, he radiated the kind of casual menace that came from decades of getting his way through violence. But it was the man standing behind him that made my breath catch in my throat. James Harper looked exactly like our father. The same auburn hair, the same sharp jawline, The same green eyes I saw in my own mirror each morning. 5 years had hardened him, adding muscle to his frame and lines to his face. But he was unmistakably my brother. The brother I'd mourned, whose funeral I'd attended, whose grave I'd visited every year on the anniversary of his supposed death. "Hello, sister," James said, his voice carrying an accent I didn't recognize. Russian, maybe, or something Eastern European. "You look well, considering the circumstances." Viktor Kozlov leaned back in his chair, studying me with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with silver hair slicked back and hands that looked soft until you noticed the scars across his knuckles. "Miss Elena Harper," he said, pronouncing each syllable with careful precision. "The woman who has caused me so much trouble." "I didn't cause you anything," I replied, letting fear creep into my voice while the hidden recording equipment captured every word. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Were you?" Kozlov gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him, positioned perfectly to catch every angle from the cameras I knew Dante had placed throughout the warehouse. "Or were you exactly where Dante Moretti wanted you to be?" I sat down carefully, letting my hands shake as I placed them on the metal table. "I don't know what you mean." "Your brother has told me fascinating things about your childhood, Elena. About how you always were too curious for your own good, always inserting yourself into situations that didn't concern you." Kozlov's smile held no warmth. "It seems some things never change." James moved to stand beside Kozlov's chair, and I could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the tailored suit that spoke of money and influence. My dead brother had done very well for himself in the criminal underworld. "Tell me about your relationship with Dante Moretti," Kozlov continued conversationally. "He's protecting me," I said, which was true enough. "After Derek died, Mr. Moretti said I wasn't safe because of what I'd overheard." "And what did you overhear?" I recounted the conversation about weapons shipments and warehouse locations. Information that Marco had confirmed was already known to Kozlov's organization. As I spoke, I could see one of Kozlov's men taking notes, probably cross-referencing my story against intelligence they'd already gathered. "Interesting," Kozlov said when I finished. "And during your time at the Moretti estate, what did you observe?" This was the crucial moment. I began describing the mansion's layout, security protocols, and personnel details, all carefully selected information that would appear valuable while actually being useless. The real security measures were different from what I described. The personnel assignments had been changed, and the defensive positions I detailed were decoys Dante had established specifically for this meeting. "You pay very close attention to details," James observed, "almost like you were trained to gather intelligence." "I was trained as a physical therapist," I shot back, letting irritation override fear for a moment. "We're taught to observe and document everything. It's part of the job." "Yes," Kozlov said thoughtfully. "Your medical training. That's actually why you're here, Elena." He stood up, walking around the table with predatory grace. "You see, I've been looking for someone with your specific skills. Someone who understands human anatomy, pain management, recovery techniques. Someone who could be very useful in my operations." "I help people heal," I said, genuine revulsion creeping into my voice. "I don't hurt them." "Oh, but healing and hurting are just different applications of the same knowledge," Kozlov replied, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder with deceptive gentleness. "And I think you'd be surprised what you're capable of when properly motivated." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red shadows, but by then Dante's assault team was already moving. I dove under the metal table as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the warehouse becoming an echo chamber of violence and shouting. Kozlov's men were professionals, but they'd been expecting a negotiation, not a coordinated military strike. Dante's forces moved with surgical precision, each team hitting predetermined targets, while communications equipment jammed Kozlov's ability to call for reinforcements. Through the chaos, I saw James diving for cover behind a shipping container, his hand reaching for a weapon that had been hidden beneath his jacket. The brother I'd mourned was reaching for a gun, preparing to kill the people trying to save me. "Elena, move!" Dante's voice cut through the gunfire as he appeared at the warehouse entrance, leading his second wave of attackers. I scrambled from under the table, staying low as bullets whined overhead. James had found his weapon and was returning fire, his aim disturbingly accurate as he forced Dante's men to take cover. "Behind you!" I screamed as one of Kozlov's men flanked Dante's position. Dante spun and fired in the same motion, dropping the attacker before turning his attention back to the main battle. But Kozlov himself had disappeared in the confusion, using the firefight as cover to slip away toward the warehouse's rear exit. I couldn't let him escape. Too much depended on ending this tonight. Without conscious thought, I ran toward the back of the warehouse, ducking between shipping containers and following the sound of Kozlov's retreating footsteps. The man who'd planned to torture information out of me, who'd killed Derek and God knew how many others, was 20 feet away from freedom. "Victor!" I called out, letting desperation color my voice. "Don't leave me here." He turned, pale eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like a predator caught in headlights. "Elena? What are you doing?" "They'll kill me if they find me here," I said, walking closer with trembling steps. "Please, I can be useful to you. I can tell you things about Moretti's organization that your other sources don't know." Kozlov hesitated, greed warring with suspicion in his expression. That moment of indecision cost him everything. The knife I'd taken from James's jacket, lifted during our brief reunion embrace, slid between his ribs with the precision my medical training had taught me. I found the gap between the third and fourth ribs, angled upward toward his heart, and pushed until the blade found vital organs. "This is for Derek," I whispered as Kozlov's eyes widened with shock and understanding. "And for trying to use me as your personal torture expert." Viktor Kozlov, head of the Russian organization that had terrorized half the East Coast, died with my name on his lips and surprise in his eyes. The man who'd built an empire on fear and violence was killed by a 23-year-old physical therapy student who'd learned anatomy to heal people. The irony would have been funny if there'd been time to appreciate it. "Elena," James's voice came from behind me, filled with disbelief. "What have you done?" I turned to face my brother, the knife still in my hand, Kozlov's blood staining my clothes. "I chose a side," I said simply. "He was going to make us both rich," James said, raising his weapon with shaking hands. "We could have ruled this city together." "No," I replied, stepping over Kozlov's body. "You chose to rule through fear and violence. I chose to build something worth protecting." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, but it wasn't James who fired. Dante appeared from behind a shipping container, his weapon still smoking, my brother crumpling to the ground with a bullet through his heart. "He was going to kill you," Dante said simply, holstering his gun and crossing to where I stood over Kozlov's corpse. I looked down at my brother's body, feeling nothing but a strange kind of relief. The James Harper who'd taught me to ride a bike had died 5 years ago in that car accident. The man lying on the warehouse floor was just someone wearing his face. "It's over," I said, dropping the blood-stained knife and walking into Dante's arms. "Yes," he agreed, holding me against his chest while sirens wailed in the distance. "It's over." Around us, the warehouse had fallen silent, except for the crackling of flames, where a stray bullet had ignited some old paperwork. Kozlov's organization would crumble without its leader, his lieutenants turning on each other in the power vacuum his death would create. The war was over. And Elena Harper, the woman who'd crashed into Dante Moretti's car and accidentally started this whole chain of events, had ended it with a precisely placed blade between the ribs of New York's most dangerous criminal. I wasn't the same person who'd fled from Derek Morrison's abuse. I was someone harder, more decisive, and capable of killing when necessary to protect what mattered most. I was exactly who I needed to be to stand beside Dante Moretti as his equal partner in everything that came next. 8 months after Viktor Kozlov's death, I stood on the balcony of our penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and amber. My hand rested protectively over the gentle curve of my belly, where our twins were growing strong and healthy, due to arrive in the spring. Elena Moretti. The name still felt new on my tongue, like expensive wine that takes time to fully appreciate. But everything about my life felt new now. The way I moved through the world, the respect in people's eyes when they recognized me, the absolute certainty that I belonged exactly where I was. "The board meeting is in an hour," Dante said from the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the kind of smile that still made my pulse quicken. Even in his business suit, preparing for a day of managing legitimate enterprises, He radiated the dangerous magnetism that had first captured my attention in that rain-soaked intersection. "Which board?" I asked, accepting the cup he offered. We had so many now. The medical foundation I'd established using Kozlov's seized assets. The construction company that provided jobs for former soldiers transitioning to civilian life. The import-export business that had become surprisingly profitable once we'd eliminated its criminal components. The hospital expansion project. Your project. Dante settled beside me at the railing, his free hand coming to rest over mine on my stomach. Dr. Elena Moretti, founding director of the Moretti Medical Center. It has a nice ring to it. The medical center had been my idea, born from the realization that my skills could heal more than just gunshot wounds and broken bones. We were building a state-of-the-art facility in Queens, designed to serve the communities that traditional healthcare often overlooked. It would be staffed by medical professionals who understood discretion, funded by profits from our legitimate businesses, and managed by someone who'd learned that sometimes healing required more than just clinical expertise. "Any word from the federal task force?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the contentment in Dante's expression. Agent Morrison signed off on the final reports yesterday. The FBI is officially satisfied that the Kozlov organization has been completely dismantled, with no remaining threats to public safety. Dante's smile held satisfaction, and something that might have been pride. They're particularly impressed with the intelligence you provided about the medical supply theft rings. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same federal agents who'd spent years trying to infiltrate Dante's organization had ended up working with us to eliminate a genuine threat to public safety. My detailed knowledge of Kozlov's operations, combined with Dante's strategic expertise, had led to the arrest of over 40 criminals involved in everything from human trafficking to pharmaceutical theft. And the construction permits for the Brooklyn project? Approved yesterday. Will break ground next month on the first of 12 affordable housing complexes. Dante's thumb traced gentle circles on my hand. By the time our children are old enough to understand, the Moretti name will be associated with hospitals, schools, and homes. Not just the old business. The old business. We still called it that, though most of the Moretti family's traditional activities had been either legitimized or eliminated over the past 8 months. The protection services had become a licensed security company. The import operations had gone completely legal. Even the loan services now operated under federal banking regulations. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. A question that had become ritual between us. "You're giving up an empire your grandfather built. I'm transforming it into something better," Dante corrected, the same answer he'd given every time. "Something our children can be proud to inherit." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, I could see the remnants of our old world scattered across the city. The warehouse in Brooklyn where Kozlov had died was now a community center. The mansion in Long Island had been sold to a tech entrepreneur who'd turned it into a conference center. Even the Riverside Rehabilitation Center where I'd once worked part-time was now under Moretti Medical's umbrella, its services expanded and its mission elevated. "Mrs. Moretti?" The voice belonged to Sarah, our housekeeper and former member of Dante's security team. Her transition from bodyguard to domestic staff had been smoother than anyone expected, though I suspected she still carried at least 2 weapons under her perfectly pressed uniform. "Yes? The car is ready for your appointment with Dr. Chen, and Mr. Ricci has arrived for his meeting with Mr. Moretti. Dr. Chen was my obstetrician, a brilliant woman who'd been treating high-risk pregnancies for 20 years and understood the unique challenges of expecting twins. Mr. Ricci was the former head of Kozlov's financial operations, who'd decided that cooperating with federal authorities was preferable to spending the rest of his life in prison. "I should go," I said, finishing my coffee. "The twins have been active all morning, and Dr. Chen wants to monitor their positioning." Dante walked me to the elevator, his hand never leaving the small of my back. Even now, 8 months after the last shots were fired, he remained protective in ways that should have felt suffocating, but instead felt like love made manifest. "Elena," he said as the elevator doors began to close. "Tonight, after all the meetings and appointments, I want to show you something." "What kind of something?" "The kind that requires champagne and candlelight, and a question I should have asked months ago." The elevator doors closed on his enigmatic smile, leaving me with butterflies in my stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with the possibility that Dante Moretti still had surprises up his expertly tailored sleeves. Dr. Chen's appointment confirmed what we'd suspected. The twins were healthy, growing perfectly, and positioned for a relatively uncomplicated delivery in 12 weeks. Baby A was slightly larger, probably going to be our little overachiever. Baby B was perfectly positioned, but seemed content to let their sibling take the lead. Just like their parents, I murmured, studying the ultrasound images that showed two perfect profiles in black and white. By the time I returned to the penthouse, Manhattan was transitioning from afternoon to evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink that made our windows look like stained glass. Dante was waiting in our living room, but he'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that made his brown eyes look almost black. "Close your eyes," he said, taking my hands with the same gentle reverence he'd shown from our first day together. "Dante, trust me." I closed my eyes, letting him guide me through our home toward what I assumed was the balcony. But instead of outside air, I felt the warmth of candles and smelled roses. Dozens of them, if the fragrance was any indication. "Open," Dante said softly. Our dining room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of white candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, while red roses covered every surface in cascades of silk and velvet. A small table was set for two in the center of it all, with champagne chilling beside sparkling cider for the pregnant woman who couldn't drink alcohol, but still deserved celebration. "Dante, this is 8 months ago. You crashed into my life and changed everything," he said, pulling out my chair with old-world gallantry. "You took a spoiled crime prince and turned him into a man worthy of building something beautiful." I sat down, overwhelmed by the romance of the gesture and the love shining in his eyes. "You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason." "No," Dante said, moving to stand beside my chair. "You gave me everything." That's when he dropped to one knee, producing a ring box from his pocket with the flourish of a magician performing his greatest trick. The diamond inside caught the candlelight and threw it back in rainbow fragments, but it was the expression on Dante's face that took my breath away. "Elena Harper Moretti, mother of my children, partner in all things, queen of everything we've built together," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" I stared at him through tears of joy and love and overwhelming gratitude for the strange chain of events that had brought us to this moment. "We're already married," I pointed out, laughing through my tears. "We had the ceremony 6 months ago. We had a business arrangement," Dante corrected, sliding the ring onto my finger above my wedding band. "Two people making strategic decisions about their future. This time, I'm asking Elena Moretti, the woman who chose to stay, who chose to fight, who chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage of everything we used to be." "Yes," I said, pulling him up for a kiss that tasted like champagne and promises, and the absolute certainty that we had built something worth protecting. "Yes to all of it." As Dante spun me around our candle-lit dining room, I caught my reflection in the windows that overlooked our city. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the frightened physical therapy student who'd crashed her Honda Civic into a stranger's SUV on a rainy night in Manhattan. Elena Moretti was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to the empire she'd helped transform from criminal enterprise into legitimate dynasty. She was someone who could kill when necessary to protect her family, who could heal when mercy was the better choice, and who ruled beside Dante Moretti as his equal in every way that mattered. Our children would inherit hospitals and schools instead of territories and tribute. They would grow up knowing that their parents had chosen love over fear, construction over destruction, and each other over everything else the world had offered. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and absolutely perfect. And it had all started with a car accident on a rainy night, when a woman fleeing her past collided with a man who would become her future.